as she said, with the Local Government Commission and the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition. All participants are muted for the duration of this webinar. However, if you have questions, please just type them into the chat box and we'll go over them during the Q&A. If we don't get to certain questions, we'll follow up to all attendees after the webinar with the answers to those questions. And lastly, we are recording this webinar just as a notice. And then I wanted to introduce our two panelists, Jessica C. and Russell Carr. Jessica is the Distributed Energy Coordinator for San Francisco Department of the Environment. In this role, she works to facilitate the use of distributed energy resources in support of the city's goal to achieve 100% renewable electricity by 2030. Previously, she was a program manager at the Association for Energy Affordability and worked to implement the California Low-Income Weatherization Program for large multifamilies, providing energy efficiency upgrades, solar thermal, and PV to multifamily buildings in disadvantaged communities. And Russell is a chartered electrical engineer with 12 years of experience specializing in the policy, planning, entitlement, and procurement of renewable energy, microgrids, and energy storage systems as integral elements to urban infrastructure. He is currently with ARUP and has extensive working history with the City and County of San Francisco, PG&E, San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and the State of California. His recent work includes the Solar Resilient Project for the City and County of San Francisco under funding from the U.S. Department of Energy and in cooperation with City and County departments. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Jessica and Russell.
Thank you, Alicia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on this lovely afternoon for us to walk through our solar plus storage sizing tool with you. So before we jump right into the demo, I will provide a very brief overview of the solar plus storage resiliency project, and then I'll hand it over to Russ for the live demo. So this project, our overall project, is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy's SunShot initiative through the Solar Market Pathways Program to advance solar deployment across the U.S. Our project analyzes the potential for solar plus storage for resiliency. In other words, planning for emergency backup power in the event of the next large-scale grid outage. Our project contributes to San Francisco's climate action goals by using solar energy to provide greenhouse gas-free emergency power as opposed to backup generators, as well as having on-site energy storage at facilities that will serve the community in time of emergencies. So with this grant funding, we are working with many partners, such as technical consultants with ARUP as our lead consultant, many city departments from first responders, public health, and Department of Emergency Management, and so forth. And we're just looking for the best applications for the installation, identifying the best locations, sizing the systems for maximum benefit, and sizing the cost of different ownership and financing. In addition to analyzing the feasibility for within San Francisco, our hopes for this project is that it will create the foundation necessary to serve as a national model for other cities and counties to do the same, to really start thinking about and planning energy use as it relates to resiliency. This is a 3-year project that ends at the end of this year. So in addition to the tool that we are demoing today, we will also have other resources available by the end of the year. Right now, we are in the process of publishing a roadmap describing our process, what worked, what didn't, best practices manual based on our experience, and as well as resources such as fact sheets that others can easily use and apply to their cities and counties. So with that, this is my contact information. Please feel free to email me with any questions you may have or comments, and I will turn it over to Russ for the tool demo.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. So what we're going to demo today is a solar and storage sizing tool. The website for this solar and storage sizing tool is solarresilient.org. or solarresilient.com. Both web addresses will get you to the same place. So we've developed this tool primarily to size the physical rating and electrical capacity of solar and storage that is used for resilience applications to provide power to buildings when the grid is down. So we're envisaging this is part of a disaster planning scenario. So whether on the west coast and earthquakes are the issue, or the east coast where it's hurricanes and storms, we want this tool to be used to allow people to very quickly get an estimation if solar and storage is the right technology for them. So who we're targeting this tool at is anyone who has a basic understanding of solar and how to size a solar system. So if anybody can use NREL's PV watts, anybody can use this tool. It requires the same level of effort and the same level of kind of technical know-how. So very, 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 very easy to use. And we see this being used by city planners, architects, engineers, consultants, facilities managers, and building owners, and portfolio owners, so maybe hotels or other real estate people who have portfolios. So it's meant to be very easy to use. And I'm going to demonstrate within about 20 to 25 minutes all of the features that this tool will have. So when you arrive on the landing page, you'll see what you're seeing on the screen now. We have the DOE's logo on here to state that this was sponsored and paid for by the DOE. Also, SF Environment's logo is on there. And I work for Arup, the design consultant, and our logo is here on the bottom. So as this was developed by a DOE grant, essentially taxpayer funded, this website is 100% free to use. There's no sign-up fees. It's always going to be free. The code is open source, so there's no IP developed. It's all for the public good. So no one can make money off this tool. It's for the free use of the public. The tool can be used by anyone in any US state in its current format. We do have 6 months of this project left, and we have some funding in that 6 months set aside for any tool improvements that may come out over the webinars that we're hosting. And one such webinar, one of the suggestions was, could we make this tool international? And that's possible. So PV Watts, which is the NREL solar forecaster, can be used in many countries throughout the world. And we're going to replicate the same countries that can be used on. So if anyone has any, from this demo, or they go and have a play with the tool, if they have any suggestions about how the tool could be more suitable to be used by cities, we would welcome that feedback. And if it's possible, we would wrap that feedback into a future version of the tool. So it will always be on this website. We would just update the code behind the scenes and publish those features as they become available. So the first thing I'd like to demo is we didn't want to write a user manual for this document that people didn't want to read. So if we click on this info button, there are 4 tabs, and within these tabs, you can learn everything that the tool does and every calculation that the tool does with about 10 minutes reading. So the first tab is an About tab. This explains why the tool was developed. It explains that typically standby power is often provided by either permanent or temporary diesel generators. And during a lot of recent disasters overseas and in the US, diesel fuel becomes a scarce commodity. So we're saying here that this tool has been developed to allow a user to assess if solar and storage is right for them and either move away from diesel completely or supplement the diesel with solar and storage. We then have an Assumptions tab. What this tab does here is tells you all of the assumptions that are baked into this tool. All of the assumptions, most of the assumptions rather, are editable in the tool. So if your building doesn't face due south, you can correct for that and the PV output will adjust accordingly. It also goes through the area density of PV that we're assuming. So we assume that you can install 15 watts per square foot of rooftop PV and 9 watts per square foot of parking lot PV. We talk about the 4 types of batteries that you can use in the tool. So lithium ion, advanced lead acid, flow batteries, and aqueous batteries. We also state that you can enter your own battery if you have a different technology. And then we also go through the various efficiencies and charge rates of the battery. And that's all summarized in a table throughout the tool. And again, most of these are user adjustable if they have a specific other technologies they want to assume. Then there's a calculations tab. I'm not going to spend time talking about this too much now because we're going to demo every single one of these calculations. But here in this column, basically tells you everything the tool can do in terms of the calculations and also how the tool provides those individual calculations. So the user can understand why the tool is doing what it's doing and how that calculation is performed. Then the final tab we have is a sponsors tab. So we're just saying here, we're acknowledging that this was made possible by the DOE, and we report what DOE grant number that was on. So when you enter the website, the first thing that we ask you to do is create a username and password. And the reason we do that is we want you to be able to analyze every building that you have, and it's all saved on the tool. You don't have to download spreadsheets. You don't have to download a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of analysis to post-process. Everything that you do will be saved on the tool. We don't ask for anything else except a username, an email address, and a password. So no other information is needed to be provided. No credit cards, no addresses, just an email address so we can set up an account for you. So now we've entered. I have an account and I've logged in to my particular account here. So the first thing we want to do is create a new property. So what I'm going to demo here is some of the ways that the tool can operate. So the first one is a very quick method. So what we need to do is we enter our project name. So I'm just going to call this test. And this project name here is what the tool uses to save your property. So I'm going to say this is in San Francisco, in California, and the zip I'm going to put is the zip that Jessica and I are located at now, which is 94105. We're in downtown San Francisco, so the Soma Mission area. So in order to be able to size a system for you, the tool needs some constraints. So we wouldn't expect a user to get an unrealistic use case out of this. So we wouldn't expect a user to say, I want to back up all of my building, but then the tool say, well, you don't actually have enough roof space for this. So we want to bound the tool in what's realistic. So the first thing a user needs to do is enter the available area that they have on their roof for PV, and also the parking lot area that they have for PV. And what I typically do here is I go to Google Earth or another software that you might like to use, and I just take a look at the roof and I measure very quickly upon the roof which areas would be suitable for PV. So you can see on this screen I've got now, there is some mechanical equipment on the roof. Some of the roof is also shaded, so I avoid these areas. So the kind of polygons I've got in light blue or turquoise on the screen are the areas where I could fit PV in. And I do the same on the parking lot. So I've got a parking lot ramp up here, so I can't put PV there. This C-shaped along the edge of the building will become shaded. So again, I don't put PV there. And as a general rule, if you didn't want to go to the trouble of looking up Google Earth and measuring some items, as a good general rule, if you have a roof space and a parking lot, if you assumed between 40 and 60% of that area was available for PV, that would typically get you in the ballpark. So this example I've got on screen now is a retail area in San Francisco. The total roof area is 64,000 square feet, and the total PV area on that roof is just under 30,000 square feet. So you see we're in that 40 to 60% range. And the same is true on the parking lot. The parking lot has an area of about 56,000 square feet here, and we can get 18,000 square feet of PV. So if you just use that 40 to 60% rule, you're going to get a good initial approximation. So back to the tool, I picked an office building here in San Francisco. So I pre-measured this roof, and it's about 6,500 square foot of total space, but we can fit 3,000 square feet of PV space here. So I simply enter 3,000 there. And I've done the same on the parking lot, and we have 5,000 square feet of suitable PV. So next thing we need to put into the tool is, how long do I want this facility to be off-grid for? So how long of a utility outage am I designing for? So a lot of the work we've done in San Francisco has been based on seismic issues. And typically, PG&E, so the local utility here in Northern California and San Francisco, has done extensive studies to figure out if the big earthquake happened, so if 1906 was repeated, with the current systems, how long would it take to restore power to San Francisco? So the results from that survey and that work, it takes between 1 and 7 days for most people to have power restored. So after 3 days, 60% are restored, and after 7, 97% of the city is restored. So that's very different to gas on the West Coast. So seismic is our risk here. And if there's a seismic event, gas can be out anywhere from 1 month to 6 months. I know on the East Coast, gas is a lot more resilient gas can be more resilient than electrical systems due to hurricanes and storms being the threat there. Power lines are more susceptible to outages than gas lines. But that's why we, for the San Francisco use cases, have tended to an electrical system for resilience rather than CHP, which may be suitable for other parts of the country. So that's set the outage. The final thing we have to do is how much power do we want to provide? How much emergency power do we want to provide? So that's the first way I'm going to show you to do this is the easy and quick way. So all someone needs to do is look at their electricity bill. And on their electricity bill, it typically tells you the maximum power demand in any given month. So I'm going to assume for this building, the peak power of this building is 90 kilowatts. That's straight off my utility bill. And the tool has a preloaded profile of an office building. And what the tool does, it uses the kilowatt function that the user enters here, and also uses the climate zone that this user is in the US, and then transposes that standard office building profile to the building profile where we enter the peak load and the climate zone. And this is the first of 3 methods. The other ones are more detailed, but again, this one here is the really quick answer. And then the final point is, how much emergency load do I want to design for? So the work we've been doing in San Francisco, the emergency load compared to the normal load varies on the building type. So if we looked at an office building or a school, the emergency load might be 10% of the regular load, because the use case in emergency where we're sheltering people is very different than the business as usual mode. However, if we look at a library, so libraries that was looked at in San Francisco actually have more people, so more foot traffic and longer working hours than they would during a regular Monday to Friday operation. So the load of those buildings might be 100%. So for the sake of argument, we're going to look at, this is an office building that I've entered here. So we're going to say we want to keep on 10% of the regular power as emergency power. So that's got some wrong here. Okay, I've typed in something wrong here. Let me just test this. Okay, let me just try this again. There seems to be an error for some reason, so apologies for that. I'm just going to quickly retype those features in. I think the error may be because I've already this morning done another demo, and I think I called it test. So I think it's just got a duplicate building. Let me just quickly do this again. Okay, I've got 10%. Try that. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. I did a demo this morning. I duplicated the building names. That's an error, sorry. Okay, so now we've saved all the data. Now we'll just press calculate. And very quickly, the tool will automatically size your system. So let's look at, the first thing to look at is the emergency load graph. So you see on the bottom left of the screen will be a graph of the load of the building throughout the year, so January through December. And this is how the load varies. So we have a 90 kilowatt peak load. So unsurprisingly, we've said we want a 10% emergency load. So look at our peak load here, we've got 9 kilowatts. So we have 9 kilowatts of emergency load. Varies between a peak of maybe 6 to 9. So what the tool then does is it looks at the energy that we have for 3 days, because that's the outage duration we selected, and ensures that the battery and the solar provide power to that. So you see here, with these parameters, the tool is saying, I need a solar array of 19 kilowatts, and that 19 kilowatt solar array is going to take up 43% of my roof space, but no parking space. And it's going to generate 30,000 kilowatt hours of energy per year. It's then saying I need a 16 kilowatt, 64 kilowatt hour battery. So this is a 4-hour battery, which is common in lithium. And if you look at the bottom output graph, the blue lines you can see on the graph is the load of the actual building over this 3-day outage. The yellow spikes is the solar irradiation, so in the day. And then the turquoise or teal line is the battery capacity. So on day one, the battery is charged, and it discharges pretty heavily for the first 2 days because it's not a great solar day. And then it charges up again and continues to operate. So there are 2 ways that we size the solar and storage. The first one is what we call a typical array, and this is what's probably going to be used most. So what this does here is it adds up all of the solar irradiation hours in the year, adds up the physical electrical load that we're designing for in the year, and basically finds the average point of these 2 systems. So it takes an average day for solar and an average day for load. And then we say we want at least a 50% confidence factor that the solar and storage we're providing will provide power to the loads that we're designing for. So this is fine for a shelter. If someone if it's a shelter used for some task lighting, charging people's cell phones, this method is fine, and it won't oversize the system. But if you've got a real critical facility, so just imagine we're looking at a dialysis center where you cannot have an interruption of power. If we're sizing solar and storage for resilience, we really do need that power that those dialysis machines need. So what we would do here is we would tick this worst case button. So what this worst case button does is it looks at all the hours in the year, and it picks the worst days of solar irradiation. So we're effectively picking December 21. And it looks at the highest load that you want to provide power to. So worst generation, highest load, and then it'll size the system accordingly. So you can see in this example, we've jumped from a 19 kilowatt solar array up to a 46 kilowatt solar array. We're using 100% of our roof and 2% of our parking lot. So in reality, we wouldn't install, the parking lot PV for 2%. We'd back off a little bit on the loads. And then again, the battery's gone up to 24 kilowatts, 96 kilowatt hours. So a bigger system. But now if you look at this system duration probability, this graph here is telling us how certain we are that we will be able to provide power to these loads. And you can see here, even after 5 days, we're still 93% confident. And the tool wants at least a 95% certainty that the duration that you select can be provided power for by the loads. So that's why the systems have gone much bigger. So some of the other features I'll test are in the advanced tab. So this particular use case is asking for a 19 kilowatt PV array. But what happens if I'm a building and I've got a 15 kilowatt PV array already installed? Now I can allow the tool to size another 4 kilowatts of solar like it has done, or I can tick a button saying don't add any more solar. So to add 4 kilowatts of PV is probably going to be an expensive project for the small capacity you are getting. So by clicking that don't add additional PV button, we're locking the tool to say 15 kilowatts is the maximum generation we are going to get. So what the tool does here is it upsize the battery slightly. So it was a 90 kilowatt hour battery, and we've now gone up just over 10% to a 100 kilowatt hour battery. So it allows a user to very quickly play with a few tabs and understand if they do not want to install more solar, there are options for that. Another thing we can demo is if the building has an existing diesel generator. So let's say this building has a small standby diesel generator rated at 5 kilowatts, so approximately half of the peak load. And let's say it has a diesel tank size, so it can run for 24 hours at full load. So what the tool does here is rather than using all of the diesel in day one, the tool says, the tool looks at the outage duration. And if I'm designing for 3 days off grid, what the tool will do is it'll stretch your diesel fuel out for multiple days. So you've always got some diesel fuel to fall back on. So what this has done is now it's saying 14 kilowatt array will be sufficient because we've got the diesel, and the battery is now reduced by half. We now need a 48 kilowatt hour battery. So again, it allows you to play with those components. If we look at the graph of how the system performs, you'll see that I entered a 5 kilowatt diesel generator, but it's running at a much lower capacity, but it's stretching the fuel out for 3.5 days. So again, lets the building owner play around with how they want to combine solar, storage, and if they want to use diesel at all, then that can be built in. We assume that the tool, if someone's going to install a battery, our default battery is lithium-ion because they're one of the most common batteries that people are putting in for a service called demand charge mitigation. So demand charge mitigation is effectively installing a battery at your facility to discharge in the peak electrical tariff period, so typically between 4 and 7, and reducing the amount that a user pays for demand charges. So it's effectively an economic play. There are companies that will free install a battery for you, but they take a cut of the demand charge mitigation savings to pay for the battery, and you get the benefit of having the battery at no upfront costs. So if you were doing a project with one of the San Francisco schools where they would rather have a lead acid battery, so more of a stationary battery that can sit there like we have everywhere on uninterruptible power supplies, and they don't want to cycle the battery every day. They just want to use the battery for resilience. So we can change the battery to be a resilience-only battery. And what you'll see is now the battery is 48 kilowatt hours. If I recalculate this, it will reduce the battery capacity slightly. And the reason it does that is if we're using our battery for demand charge mitigation, What the wrong type in there. What the battery is doing is it's assuming that on day one of the outage, the battery only has 40% of its capacity left, because the battery has been used for demand charge mitigation and the battery has had its power reduced. If we put it in this resilience only mode, it assumes on the day of the outage that the battery is charged at 100%. So it just allows you to play with your battery sizing for the application that you have. So other things we can change in the advanced type, we could say we wanted a different type of PV panel. So we could go for premium efficiency or thin film. We could have roof mount, we could put open racking, we could put tracking PV. We can change the tilt, we can change the angle that the PV faces. So is it south, is it west, is it east, or is it anywhere in between? And we can also change the system losses and the inverter efficiency. So that's the advanced parameters done. I'm just going to put these back to their default settings. So now I'd like to demo some of the other areas that we have for electricity. So most people will be able to get their electricity bill from their utility. So they'll be able to download in an Excel file or a CSV file what their either hourly or 15-minute energy data is. So if you have your individual building's energy data, you can click on the standard tab here. And what this standard tab is doing is it's looking at somebody's utility data. So there's an example file here on the website that somebody can download and then compare to their own. So all you have to do is click Choose File, click where this file is located on your computer. So it's just a CSV file. And what this CSV file will contain is for every hour or every 15 minutes, it will have a kilowatt value of your power consumption. Now, if we scroll down here, we can see the graph has changed. So this graph has now changed into what you'd expect for a kind of typical electrical profile. So this profile I've downloaded here is from a school. So we can change, this graph here displays your emergency load percentage. So let's say for this particular building, we want to have 20% backup power. So if I up the slide up to 20%, and click recalculate. So this will now, rather than using that standard profile from an office building, it uses your actual building profile to make these calculations. So what I deliberately put quite a high value there. So you'll see at this graph here, I'm now saying we have an emergency load profile of a peak of 60 kilowatts, which is a fairly large peak. But we've only got a 3,000 square foot roof, which is quite small. So now you'll see the tool has some red warnings. So what this is saying is I need 180 kilowatts of PV to be off grid for 3 days and to provide 20% of my building load as emergency power. So that would take up 100% of my 3,000 square foot roof and 310% of my parking lot. So it needs 15,500 square feet of area. So obviously that's saying the building is constrained by area here. So the tool recommends a few options to rectify this. So either reduce your outage days, increase the area available for PV. So either free up more roof space from mechanical equipment or allow more of the parking lot to be used, or some other area such as a greenfield site next to your particular building, or reduce the electrical load. So I'm just gonna reduce the electrical load. So I'm gonna pull this down, let's try it at 10% and recalculate this. So just what we're trying to demonstrate here is it's very easy for somebody who has some knowledge of the building and the area to click a few values to change these tabs and try and get a suitable size. So I haven't got this quite right. It still says we need 92 kilowatts of PV, which is 4% over the space that we have. So if I take this down to 9% and then click recalculate again. So very quickly, you can hone in on a size that is suitable for your particular constraints on site without having to go to a lot of work. So there, this has found a solution. We've got 9% emergency load, which peaks at probably around 27.5 kilowatts of load. And now we're saying we need 83 kilowatts of PV, which is 100% of my roof and 84% of my parking lot. So that's going to generate 127,000 kilowatt hours of clean energy a year. And the battery size I need is 80 kilowatts, 320 kilowatt hours. So not such a big system on the battery, and one that's in most manufacturers is size ratings. So the final way to put load in is the way we've been using it most here in San Francisco. So the buildings that we've been looking at have been primarily buildings that are going to be used as in a disaster preparedness plan. So it's primarily sheltering or evacuating members of the public in the city that can't shelter at home. So these are rec centers, these are schools, churches, and these types of buildings. And they have, as I said earlier, a very different use case than their normal operation. So a school may normally have 1,000 children in many, many rooms throughout a 3-story school. But perhaps in a shelter situation, we're only using one of those floors of the school, and we're perhaps using 4 or 5 rooms in that school. So maybe 2 classrooms, maybe the cafeteria, an auditorium, and a gym. So very different to normal operations. So what we've been doing with the Department of Emergency Management in San Francisco and a facilities engineer is walking the particular spaces of a building that are going to be used for an emergency and doing assessment of, in these particular rooms, how many lighting fixtures do they have, how many people would shelter in this space. And then we build up a profile of how that building is going to be used in an emergency. So that's called the detailed tab. And on here, what we do is we add individual loads, kind of row by row in this assessment. So there's many, many loads that are already populated in the tool. So we have ADA, we have some comms, we have heating, ventilation, and cooling, we have lighting, plug loads such as coffee machines, laptops, DVD players, TVs, some microwaves, cell phone and iPad and tablet charging, printers, a whole thing. Everything from this list is things that we have found have been needed in different shelters in San Francisco. So if I click on LED lighting, it auto populates the power of that fixture. The user can obviously edit this, but it's just a good placeholder to get them started. Then a user just needs to enter the quantity of these devices that they have and how long they will operate per day, and is there any seasonal variety. So perhaps if you've got an electric heater, it's not going to be used in the summer. And if you come across a building where the load isn't pre-populated in the tool, you can simply click add your own, then add your own in. So this is the detailed assessment, and it takes about 15 minutes to enter this once you've got all of the data from the site walk. So I'm not going to spend 15 minutes going through that now. I'm just going to demo one that we've done for a school in San Francisco. And this is called Thurgood Marshall School. So I'm going to click on this particular building, which is saved in the tool under my profile. And what you'll see here is in the electrical emergency load, we have a whole list of loads that are required for this particular building. So we have Wi-Fi, we have some electric wheelchair charging points, we have a lot of lighting in the auditorium, the cafeteria, the gymnasium. Then we have plug loads, we have some coffee urns, laptops, some PCs that city staff will be using to kind of coordinate the disaster response effort. We then have some phone charging, some radios, and 2 TVs. So TVs primarily being used to allow people to keep up in touch with news, events, and what's going on in the city. So you just enter all these loads in, press calculate, and exactly like the other demonstrations that I've shown, the tool will spit out the size of the PV array for those loads and also the size of the battery. So one of the questions that we've been asked is, does this tool do any economic analysis? So we stayed away from doing any economic analysis, primarily because this tool is a tool to be used in all 50 states in the US. And each state can often have many utilities. Each of those utilities, and maybe municipal utilities, all have different rates, different demand charges. So there was no easy way to make a tool within the budget that the DOE allowed to have economics in as well. So how we see this tool being operated is this tool will be used for the user to actually understand if solar and storage is right for them in the particular climate that they are in, where their building is located, and for the particular electrical emergency loads that that user has. Then we see this tool as a user would click on the download PDF button. Now this then spits out a nice one-page summary of the tool output. So basically the concept design. So we then envisage that the property owner will send this to a vendor, so maybe a Tesla or a STEM or a Solar City or their local vendor who does PV and storage. They'll email them this document and say, hey, we've done a quick screening assessment on our building. We think it looks like solar and storage is suitable for us. Can you please come and do a site visit or do a financial analysis of what this size system will cost and how much potentially I could save on my bill, what's the payback period? And then please come and talk to me if the numbers come out that I will be interested in. So that's the premise of why we didn't include any economics in this tool. It would have been nice to do, but unfortunately with the resources and the reach that this tool has to have, it became an impossible task. So no economics, but it does all the technical sizing. It basically allows any user to skip the concept phase of the design. They can go straight to a vendor and say, this is the ballpark, please come and do a site assessment and give me a detailed estimate of what will fit in my building. So I think they were the main features of the tool I wanted to demo. So I think we've got 15 minutes left and we can answer any questions that have come up in this time.
Great, thank you, Russell. This is Margaret. Everyone, thank you for your questions. For those of you who have questions at this point, please don't hesitate, type them into the chat question feature and we'll summarize them. There have been a couple of folks who've asked questions about residential and the application of this tool to residential facilities. And in particular, a question about utility bills that may or may not be including peak energy usage. Is there a solution to those who are either looking for that on a commercial or industrial account bill and can't find it, or if it's not included in a residential bill, where should an interested person look for that information on a residential bill?
Yeah, sure. So most utilities allow you to download I can download my apartment's electricity bill. So I can get this standard tab here. So I can download. It's called the green button in California. I'm not sure what it's called in other states. But I log on to my utility account. I say download data, and then it sends me a CSV file that I could upload to this tool straight away. So that would be one way of doing it. Another method is if you can look on your utility's website, your particular account, it will often give you either a line graph or a bar chart about your consumption. So if you could have a look at your monthly consumption and what's the biggest line in the bar chart that month, you could use that number as the as that peak number.
Okay, great. There's another question about zip codes, and you've mentioned that this tool is useful all over the United States. The question was, are all zip codes already preloaded for California? Are they loaded for the rest of the United States as well? And do they correspond to climate zones?
Yes, so how this tool works is when we enter this zip code here, that zip code basically looks to another website, so NREL's PV watts, and pulls up the solar irradiance levels in that particular zip code. So there are no zip codes that are preloaded into this tool. Any zip code anywhere in the USA, you will type the zip code here, then it pings that zip code to PV watts and pulls the PV data from that zip code. And we're also going to extend that to, it's going to be a zip/postal code soon, so it can be used in other parts of the world as well. But there's no preloaded zip codes in the tool. It calls a solar website to calculate solar irradiance. Okay, great.
Last question so far, and I would encourage listeners to send their questions. And this is a technical question. For 2-axis tracking solar systems, what parameters should be used for angle and tilt?
Yeah, so this uses, again, if we look at let's go to it. If we go to dual axis tracking here, so what this does is this, again, just calls PV watts. So in PV watts, there are default values for these features here, and it uses those default values from PV watts. So anything on the solar side, we call NREL's PV watt software to do the calculations. Then it pings it back to this tool, and that's a great website that again was funded by the DOE. It's maintained by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, funded by the DOE, and it's for most people doing a quick solar assessment. That's the go-to tool, which is why we've used it for this particular website that we've developed.
And thank you. And aligned with that, there's a comment from someone who says, it appears this tool can be used not only for emergency planning purposes. Is this true?
So it's primarily, our grant was primarily concerned with solar and storage for resilience. But there's no reason why. One of the other use cases that we've been getting a lot of questions for is just imagine I am a particular building and I want to go net zero with solar and storage. Can this tool calculate what size PV system I need and what size battery I need? So you can you could upload your electricity data in any of the ways I've described. You could say, I want a 1-day outage, because for every 24 hours, I want to assume that I can provide 100% of my load. And then on the emergency load slider, you put this at 100%, then you're effectively saying, I want to size my solar and battery to pretty much make myself net zero. So that's another way people have been using the tool.
Great, thank you. I think at this moment, those are the only technical questions that remain. We have a request for the presentation or the recording of the webinar to be made available, and yes, they will be, and also a request for Jessica's contact information again. So we can put that up on the screen before we conclude, and yes, it's also available in the materials that we will post. I think at this moment, unless anyone has any other questions, that wraps up our answers to those questions that have been posted. Russell, are there any questions that you would hope people would ask? And if so, perhaps you can preemptively answer some that perhaps you've heard from on other presentations, or that you hope people will come away with and take with them.
Yeah, so the questions that were asked were the typical questions that we get asked, plus the economics one is usually one that's always asked. That's why I kind of explained our position on that. But what I would ask the users for is if they go and have a play with the tool, and if there's something missing that would make the tool better from their standpoint, please let either Jessica or I know. So the contract we have now with the DOE has 6 more months to run. So it ends in December 31 of this year. So we have some budget set aside for tool improvements. So if there's something that the tool didn't do and you wished it could do, if you sent that to us, and then we can, if it's doable within the budget that we have, then we can add that feature to another iteration of the tool. So yeah, I would ask that if it doesn't quite do what you need, let us know and we'll try and make it do what you need.
Wonderful, thank you, Russell. Okay, Alicia, now back to you.
Okay. All right, so thank you everyone for listening to the webinar and presentation and demonstration today. We just wanted to wrap up really quickly with some slides about the LGSEC, the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition, who helped to co-host this webinar. So the LGSEC represents local government interest to the CPUC, and we focus on more specifically clean energy, energy efficiency, climate action, and community choice. And we are a membership group, and so we provide our members with timely and actionable information and regarding regulatory proceedings, specifically at the CPUC, and we also do so through quarterly forums for our members and webinars just like this one. We have a link to our website at the bottom if you're interested in learning more. And just a few of our upcoming events and other webinars. We do have another webinar on local government funding opportunities for promoting clean energy financing on Thursday, July 6th at the same time, 2 to 3 p.m. And we have another one on Thursday, July 13th for an energy legislative update. So you can find more information and register for those on our website at lgscc.org. We also have our next quarterly forum happening on September 19th in Oakland. And so we hope to see some of you again at our upcoming webinars and events.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will wrap this up at this time. Look for our posting of this recorded webinar on the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition's website. Thank you very much, Russell and Jessica. Bye-bye, everyone.